I'm very excited to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Mike Zisa, who teaches investment management and wealth management, but not to like normal people. I mean, he teaches it mostly to high school students. And in fact, he's the author of a fantastic book called The Early Investor: How Teens and Young Adults Can Become Wealthy. Mike, I want to dive into this concept of teaching young people because it's so hard to teach them about so many things. Are they really interested in learning about the intricacies of handling money correctly, or they just want mom and dad's credit card?
That's a very interesting question, Doug. By the way, thank you for having me on the show. You know, like any young adult, teenager, some of them are very interested in these topics, some are not. But I think it's super important to teach them at an early age because, when I was that age, no one taught us anything about investing and saving and not to mention money. So as you and I know, it's so important to start saving and investing at an early age. So by the time they're done with my classes, I usually have a few students open up an investment account because they realize the importance of early investing and saving.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't even hear it spoken about at home, which is such because their parents maybe are deep in credit card debt and student debt, so it doesn't even arise.
That's correct. Yeah. And, unfortunately or fortunately, many of these kids will know more about saving and investing by the time they get out of my class than most adults.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I often wonder why they let people actually go into the work world when they're going to earn money and never know what to do with it. I guess I was a little bit different because when I was a kid, my mother was a financial advisor, so this was a topic that we always spoke around, around the dinner table. In fact, my mother's mother, my grandmother, was one of the first women to be licensed as a stockbroker in America. So
wow.
It's been... And by the way, I'll tell you one more funny thing, is that people often say, women don't know enough about investing. It's like a big issue, and you got to focus on that. And I said, I don't understand. My grandmother was an investor, professional. My mother, my wife is a licensed investment advisor. So
wow,
I do get it that it doesn't always work out that way. So
right.
You obviously inspire kids to do this. What would you say is the most important lesson to start with if you were telling parents, teach your kids this?
Well, I think the most important thing is to, again, start investing, saving and or investing at an early age. As you and I both know, the earlier the better to let your investments grow over the long term, let them compound. One of the things I teach them is to begin investing in high quality long-term stocks that pay a solid dividend that typically grows every year, and take those dividends and reinvest in more shares of a company. And that's like receiving a raise every year for doing nothing. And that's an example of passive income. And the earlier they do that, the better they'll be, because if you look at the curve over a long time, it's exponential. You really get the benefits, the most benefits later on, 10, 20, 30 years from then. So I would say investing at an early age.
When you talk to people about dividend investing, how do you explain really what that means?
Well, I teach the kids that it's essentially the companies sharing their profits with the shareholders, which of course are the owners. So, I give them examples of if you own, 100 shares of a company, paying $1 a share dividend, they're receiving $100 cash into their accounts, for that first year. Then, of course, I explain to them the concept of taking that money and reinvesting in more shares of the stocks, which in turn will give the shareholders, the investor, more dividends the following year. And that doesn't even include if the company raises their dividend. And I model it out on a spreadsheet for them so they can see it in visual terms and numbers.
We're talking to Mike Zisa, who wrote the book The Early Investor: How Teens and Young Adults Can Become Wealthy. He's been talking to us not only about inspiring kids to learn, but also about some of the important types of securities that people need to know about investing. Mike, let's focus on bond investing.
Okay, so bonds, we do a whole lesson on bonds. And of course, bonds, you are not an owner of the company, you are a lender, a creditor. So I stress the importance of having bonds in any investment portfolio, even at an early age, to balance out the risk, to create an asset allocation. As we know, bonds are not the ideal investment right now because rates are still historically low, at least in the United States. But still, you need to balance risk for those times when the market just doesn't, the stock market doesn't really cooperate with us. So the bonds, again, will manage risk. for anybody's portfolio, young or old.
What about for the piece of the portfolio that really is long-term money?
As far as bonds are concerned? Well, right now, I instruct the students that if they're going to invest in bonds in their portfolio, they should stick with shorter term bonds because as interest rates rise, their bond prices will fall. And if they invest in a bond that's 10, 15, even 30 years out, then they're going to be locked in at a low rate. So I encourage them, if they want to invest in bonds, including CDs, which really aren't bonds, but they work like bonds. You might want to go a year out, at most three years out right now until interest rates go up, and then you can invest in longer term bonds.
And do the principles that you're teaching these kids, do you think it applies? I mean, I presume they're not working with huge amounts of money, but do the same ideas apply to them when they get older and actually have more money, or hopefully have more money?
Many of the principles do. I teach dollar cost averaging, and that's a great way for young people to invest small amounts of money. They can do that in a mutual fund. They can do that in a fund, which would be great for these kids. So when they get older and they have access to their retirement plan at work, for example, a 401k plan in the U.S., then they can take these principles, dollar cost averaging, and have stock mutual funds within their portfolio, bond mutual funds to reduce the risk. So, yeah, I think that the basic principles apply both, when you're younger and older.
Have you ever seen cases where some of the kids walk out of your classroom and go home and try to teach their parents and maybe had something good come out of it?
That's really amazing that you say that because I have so many parents email me or I see them at, back to school night and, they'll thank me for teaching their kids. Many of them joke around. They say, boy, I wish I could come into your class and take your course, which I find comical. Yeah, that happens quite often. And they'll ask me questions. They'll say, oh, my son or daughter came home and they asked me if I had a 401k plan, and they asked me if I had index funds, and they asked me, what if I have mutual funds, what class share do I have, or do you have a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA? So it's very interesting. I love it when the kids talk to the parents about it because I think it really hits home.
Yeah, I think that's great. It actually opens communication because, as I'm sure you know as well, one of the problems people have a lot is when those kids grow up and their parents are retired or having trouble because they didn't save enough for retirement. That leads to some very awkward discussions. So at least when the kids are young, if they've learned to open the door to have the conversation with their parents about money, maybe that's one great benefit to at least give them the tools to have the conversation. That's really important.
Very important. It really is very important. And, I've actually come across some people who have paid for their children's education, their college education, which is fine, but at the expense of their retirement, and they now regret it because now their kids are going to have to take care of them.
Yeah, a real issue. Hey, Mike, I see we're just about out of time, but I know you have so much more to teach. So in the last few seconds, tell us, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Sure. Well, my book, The Early Investor, How Teens and Young Adults Can Become Wealthy, is available on Amazon. I do have a website. It's called becomeanearlyinvestor.com. They could purchase the book there as well. I also have a Twitter account that's @investinggeek. I was trying to come up with something, a little clever. So they can reach out to me there.
All right, we will put links to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Mike Zisa, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Doug.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.